A poor farmer named Ramesh lived in a small village where the sun seemed to shine harder than anywhere else. The land was dry and cracked, the kind of soil that gave nothing back even when seeds were planted with care. For years, Ramesh had been fighting against the drought that never seemed to end. His crops failed again and again, and his animals looked thinner each day. He had a wife and 2 children who looked to him with hope in their eyes, but Ramesh often felt that hope slipping through his calloused fingers. Still, he could never show them his weakness. He always carried a quiet smile, even when his heart was heavy. Every morning before the rooster crowed, Ramesh would rise, put on his faded cotton shirt, and walk barefoot to his small field. He bent down, touched the soil, and prayed silently for rain. Sometimes clouds would gather, and he would smile thinking the skies had finally heard his prayers. But the clouds always disappeared, leaving the village dry and thirsty. Other farmers had already given up farming. Some had moved to towns in search of small jobs, but Ramesh loved his land too much to leave. He often said, "This land is not just soil, it holds the stories of my father and grandfather." His children would listen quietly, not fully understanding the depth of those words. The villagers, however, had started mocking him. Whenever Ramesh went to the market, people would whisper behind his back. "There goes the unlucky farmer," they would say. Others laughed at how he still tried to grow crops when the earth had long stopped giving. Their laughter hurt him, but he remained silent. He knew words could not change anything, only hard work could. His wife, Meena, would sometimes ask him to ignore the field and try something else, but Ramesh always answered with calm eyes, "If we leave this land, we will lose everything. One day, it will give us what we need." One morning, after another season of failure, Ramesh sat under a neem tree staring at his withered plants. His heart was tired, but his spirit refused to give up. He looked at his children, who were carrying a clay pot to fetch drinking water from a distant well. The pot looked heavier than the children themselves, and for a moment, tears filled his eyes. That was the day he made a new decision. He told himself, "If water will not come to me, then I will go to water." He picked up an old iron spade, walked to the corner of his land, and began to dig. At first, the neighbors thought he was joking. They laughed and asked him what he was doing. "Looking for gold under the soil," one of them shouted. Another added, "He has gone mad with hunger." But Ramesh ignored them. His eyes stayed on the ground as the spade struck the dry earth. Every strike created a small echo in his heart, and with every handful of soil he removed, his hope grew a little stronger. The villagers shook their heads and went about their business, but some stayed to watch, enjoying the sight of his foolishness. The work was hard. The ground was rough and full of stones. His spade often struck against rock, making sparks fly. His palms started to tear, and blisters formed quickly. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his shirt was soon soaked. Still, he kept digging. When his wife saw him in the evening, she worried. She begged him to stop, saying, "You will hurt yourself, and what if nothing is found?" But Ramesh gently placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Even if I find nothing, I will know that I tried." The next day, he returned to the pit he had started. His children followed him, curious and hopeful. They stood near him, offering him water whenever he paused. Their little hands clapped whenever he dug deeper. That small encouragement gave him new strength. He began to imagine water flowing out of the ground, filling the dry field, turning it green once again. He pictured his children playing in the water, laughing freely, and his animals drinking until their stomachs were full. Those pictures in his mind kept him moving, kept him striking the spade into the stubborn earth. As the sun climbed higher, more people gathered around, whispering to each other. Some shook their heads and said, "He will never find water here. This land is cursed." Others, especially the elderly, muttered, "Our ancestors dug here too and found nothing." But there was also a silent group who admired his spirit. They didn't laugh, they just watched with respect in their eyes. Deep down, they wished they had his courage. Ramesh dug all day and into the evening. By sunset, his hands were raw, and his back ached, but when he looked at the small pit he had created, his heart felt proud. He knew it was only the beginning. That night, as he sat by the oil lamp with his family, his children asked him, "Papa, will we get water soon?" He smiled and said, "Yes, we will. The earth has hidden something for us, and we will find it together." The days turned into a routine. Every morning, Ramesh would dig. The pit grew deeper, and the soil became harder. Sometimes he thought he saw moisture, but it was only a trick of light. Still, he did not stop. His neighbors continued to laugh, but fewer people mocked him now. Some even brought him food or water, curious to see how far he would go. His story spread from one corner of the village to another. Children followed him, cheering him on. Slowly, his lonely work became something the whole village began to notice. Inside, Ramesh felt something changing. He was no longer digging only for water. He was digging for dignity, for hope, for proof that persistence could break even the hardest ground. With every strike, he was teaching his children a lesson, never to give up, no matter how dry the land or how harsh the world seemed. His body grew weaker, but his spirit grew stronger. And though he had no idea what waited beneath, he knew that his journey had only just begun. Ramesh woke up before sunrise, his body aching from the digging he had done the day before. The blisters on his hands had hardened overnight, but they still hurt when he clenched the handle of the spade. His wife, Meena, placed a small plate of flatbread and lentils in front of him and urged him to eat. She knew he would need all the strength he could gather. His children were still half asleep, but when they saw their father preparing to leave, they rubbed their eyes and followed him outside. They had begun to see his digging as an adventure, something unusual in their dull and dry village life. As he reached the pit, Ramesh looked at the hole he had carved into the stubborn earth. It was deeper than before, but still, no water had shown itself. He took a deep breath, whispered a prayer under his breath, and raised the spade again. The sound of metal striking rock echoed across the quiet morning. Every strike seemed to shout his determination to the sky. Slowly, the sun rose, and the heat began to build, but Ramesh kept going. Sweat rolled down his face and back, but he did not stop. His children clapped whenever he threw up chunks of dirt, and their laughter gave him courage. By midday, villagers started gathering again. Some of them came out of curiosity, others came simply to laugh. A few brought their animals along, letting them graze while they watched Ramesh. One man joked loudly, "Maybe he will dig his way to the other side of the world before he finds water." The crowd burst into laughter. Another added, "Perhaps he will discover treasure, and then he won't need water." These words stung, but Ramesh stayed silent. He kept his head down and continued striking the earth. His silence became his shield, and his effort became his answer. As the hole grew deeper, the soil began to change. Instead of the dry, dusty earth from the surface, Ramesh noticed the soil was darker and heavier. This gave him a strange sense of hope. He scooped it into his hand, rubbed it between his fingers, and thought, "This feels different." His children also noticed and grew excited. "Papa, does this mean we are closer to water?" they asked eagerly. Ramesh smiled at them, not wanting to break their spirit, and simply said, "Yes, we are closer." That night, while resting under the stars, he thought about what he had found. Could it really be water nearby? Or was it just another trick of the land? His mind was restless, but his heart refused to give up. He promised himself that he would keep digging until he had no strength left. The next day, he worked harder than before. As he dug, his spade struck something unusual. Instead of the expected stone or clay, he heard a sharper sound, like metal striking a smooth surface. He paused, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and struck again. The sound repeated, clearer this time. Curious, he cleared the soil with his hands and felt something hard and smooth beneath. It wasn't like any ordinary rock. His children leaned over the edge of the pit, their eyes wide. "Papa, what is it?" one of them whispered. Ramesh dug around the strange surface, trying to uncover more of it. Slowly, he revealed a large flat slab with strange markings on it. The surface was carved with patterns, not the random shapes of natural stone but something that looked like it had been made by human hands long ago. His heart beat faster. He had expected stones, perhaps roots, maybe even water, but not this. The villagers, who had been watching from a distance, now moved closer. They murmured among themselves. Some thought it was just a decorated rock. Others said it might be the remains of something old. One old man squinted and said, "I have never seen such markings in this land." Word spread quickly through the village. People who had not cared about his digging before now came to see what he had found. Some were excited, others cautious. A few whispered that Ramesh should stop. It could be dangerous, they said. Why disturb what is buried? But curiosity was stronger than fear. Everyone wanted to see more. Ramesh himself was torn. He had set out to find water for his family, not to uncover secrets. But now that his spade had touched something unusual, he could not walk away. Something deep inside told him that the earth was hiding a story, and it had chosen him to reveal it. Over the next few days, he dug carefully around the slab. His children watched with shining eyes, bringing him small pots of water whenever he paused. Sometimes they tried to scrape the soil with their own tiny hands, eager to help. Slowly, more of the slab appeared, stretching wider than Ramesh expected. It was not just one stone but part of something larger, something hidden deep in the ground. The markings grew clearer: lines, curves, and shapes that looked like symbols. Ramesh did not understand them, but he knew they meant something important. The villagers argued among themselves. Some insisted he stop, fearing that disturbing old things would bring bad luck. Others encouraged him, saying it could bring fortune. "If it is treasure," one man said, "then Ramesh will no longer be the poor farmer. He will be the richest among us." But not everyone liked that idea. Envy began to grow in some hearts. They whispered among themselves, wondering if they should take part in the digging, so they could claim a share of whatever was found. Ramesh, however, ignored their words. His focus was on the earth in front of him, and the mystery it held. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned orange, Ramesh finally uncovered enough of the slab to see its true size. It stretched like a roof across the bottom of the pit. He tapped it again, and this time the sound echoed hollowly, as though there was space beneath. His heart pounded in his chest. This was not just a buried stone. This was the cover of something hidden below. His children gasped in excitement, and even the villagers fell silent. Nobody had expected this. The laughter disappeared, replaced by quiet murmurs of disbelief. Ramesh sat by the edge of the pit, staring at the discovery. His mind was full of questions. What lay beneath? Was it treasure? Was it something sacred? Or was it something dangerous, something better left untouched? He could not know, but he felt in his heart that he was standing at the beginning of something greater than he had ever imagined. He looked at his children, who stared at him with trust and hope, and he made a silent promise. He would not stop now. The soil had given him a sign, and he would uncover its secrets. What began as a desperate search for water had turned into a journey that none of them could have predicted. That night, the village was buzzing with stories. Some claimed Ramesh had found a lost temple. Others said it was a royal tomb. A few still mocked him, but even they could not hide their curiosity. For the first time in years, Ramesh was no longer just the unlucky farmer. He was the man who might have discovered something that could change the history of their village forever. Ramesh woke up the next morning with renewed determination. The memory of the strange slab he had uncovered filled his mind. He had started with the hope of finding water, but now the earth had shown him something completely unexpected. His hands still ached, but his heart was restless to continue. The first rays of the sun touched the village, and before the rooster had finished crowing, Ramesh was already at the pit with his spade, ready to uncover more of the mystery. His children followed close behind, their little faces glowing with excitement. As he began to scrape away the soil around the slab, he noticed how large it truly was. The markings were clearer now, and when he brushed away the dust, shapes appeared that seemed almost like letters, though he could not read them. His son asked curiously, "Papa, who put this here?" Ramesh shook his head slowly and said, "I don't know, my child, but this is not just a stone. It is something made long ago." His words carried both wonder and caution. By mid-morning, villagers started gathering around once again. Word of his discovery had spread even further overnight, and now people came not only from his own village but from nearby ones too. They leaned against the wooden fences, whispering to one another. Some were filled with excitement, while others still looked doubtful. One elderly man with a white beard muttered, "In my youth, I heard stories that this land hid secrets, but nobody believed them. Perhaps this is proof." Younger men laughed at him, calling the story old superstition. But everyone stayed, unable to walk away from the scene. Ramesh kept digging with patience. He did not want to break the slab, so he worked carefully, removing the soil around the edges. The more he uncovered, the more it became clear that it wasn't just a flat stone lying in the earth. It was a cover, and beneath it was space. When he struck it lightly with the spade, a hollow sound echoed, deeper and louder than before. The villagers gasped. Even the ones who had mocked him before now looked uneasy. A silence spread across the group. The whispers began again. Some villagers said it was a hidden treasure chest, buried by kings or warriors from centuries ago. Others feared it might be cursed, a place that was meant to remain hidden. A few warned Ramesh not to continue. "If it was buried for a reason," one man said sharply. But Ramesh could not stop now. He had already come this far, and his heart told him that the truth was waiting beneath. He only needed the courage to keep going. By afternoon, he had uncovered almost the entire slab. It stretched wider than he had expected, forming what looked like a roof over something below. The edges were lined with thick stone blocks, carefully placed by human hands. This was no accident of nature. It was a structure. The sight made the villagers gasp louder than before. Some covered their mouths in shock. Even children who had been playing nearby fell silent, their eyes wide with amazement. At this point, a few men offered to help Ramesh. They brought ropes and wooden planks, thinking they could lift the slab. But when they tried, it did not move. It was far heavier than they imagined. Sweat poured from their faces as they struggled, but the stone did not budge. Frustrated, they stepped back. Ramesh stood there quietly, thinking. He knew they would need more tools, perhaps even more people. But the hollow sound he had heard gave him strength. He felt certain that something waited beneath. The next day, more people came. News had traveled fast, and the pit became the center of the village. Some women brought food, curious to see what would happen. A few older men suggested sending for officials in the nearby town. But many villagers objected, saying, "If we call them, they will take everything. This belongs to us, not to the government." Ramesh listened silently. He was not interested in treasure or wealth. All he wanted was to see what the earth had been hiding. With the help of a few strong men, he continued working on the edges of the slab. They removed more soil until the entire outline of a doorway became visible. At one side, there was a small gap, just large enough to see inside. Ramesh bent down with a torch made of cloth wrapped around a stick. When he lit it and lowered it near the gap, a faint reflection came from inside. The villagers leaned forward, their breaths held. Something shiny had caught the light. Gasps filled the air. Some shouted, "Treasure! Treasure!" Others grew nervous. The old man with the white beard shook his head slowly, saying, "This is not ordinary. These are the remains of something ancient." But nobody left. Everyone wanted to know more. Ramesh himself was trembling. His children tugged at his sleeve, their eyes glowing with excitement. "Papa, open it. Let's see what is inside," they begged. He placed his hand gently on their heads and said softly, "We will, but we must be careful." The villagers worked together late into the evening. They brought hammers, chisels, and crowbars. Slowly, with great effort, they loosened the edges of the slab. At last, with a deep groan, the heavy stone shifted slightly. Dust rose into the air, and everyone stepped back, coughing. When the dust settled, they could see the slab had moved enough to create an opening. Darkness stretched below, and a cool breeze came out, carrying the smell of earth that had been sealed for centuries. The villagers stood frozen. Nobody dared to go down. Fear and curiosity battled inside every heart. Ramesh, however, felt a pull stronger than fear. He looked at his children, then at the villagers, and finally at the dark opening below. His voice was calm but firm when he said, "This land has given us something. We must see it. I will go first." The crowd gasped again. Some tried to stop him, saying it was too dangerous. But Ramesh's decision was firm. He tied a rope around his waist, handed the other end to the men above, and slowly began to lower himself into the darkness. As he descended, the villagers leaned over the pit, their eyes wide with fear and excitement. His torch flickered against the stone walls, revealing carvings that none of them had ever seen before. Strange figures, symbols, and designs covered the walls. Ramesh's heart raced. He called out to the people above, "There are carvings here. These are not ordinary stones." His words echoed back, filling the crowd with wonder. The deeper he went, the more he saw. The chamber below was larger than he imagined. Broken pottery, scattered coins, and ancient sculptures lay buried under the dust of ages. His torch reflected off shiny metal golden coins, ornaments, and other artifacts. His breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary place. It was the remains of something great, something that had been hidden for centuries. When he finally climbed back up, his face was pale, but his eyes shone with wonder. The villagers surrounded him, eager for answers. He told them what he had seen, and the crowd erupted into chaos. Some cheered, dreaming of wealth. Others were frightened, whispering about curses. The old man muttered again, "This is sacred. We must call the scholars." Ramesh stood silently for a moment, looking at the faces around him. He had begun his journey searching for water, but he had found something much bigger. He knew his life, and perhaps the entire village, would never be the same again. The earth had revealed its secret, and now it was up to them to decide what to do next. The discovery of the underground chamber quickly became the talk of the entire region. By the time the sun rose the next morning, strangers were already arriving at Ramesh's village. They came on bicycles, bullock carts, and even on foot, all curious to see the pit that had revealed something so mysterious. The quiet little farming village, once ignored by the outside world, had suddenly become the center of attention. Ramesh stood near the pit, still trying to understand what had happened. His heart was filled with both pride and worry. He had started digging in search of water, yet what he uncovered seemed to be a doorway to history itself. Villagers stood around him, buzzing with arguments. Some wanted to divide whatever treasure might be inside. Others warned that disturbing ancient remains would bring misfortune. The older men, remembering stories told by their grandparents, whispered that this place might be sacred. By midday, the village headman arrived with a group of officials from the nearby town. They carried notebooks, cameras, and measuring tools. The crowd fell silent as the officials looked into the pit and examined the slab. One of them, wearing glasses, bent down and ran his fingers over the carvings. His face changed instantly. He called the others, pointing at the symbols. "This is ancient," he murmured. "Older than any of us can imagine." The villagers gasped. For the first time, it was not just a farmer's word, but an educated man's voice confirming what they had suspected. The officials quickly decided to call in archaeologists from the city. Within 2 days, a team of experts arrived, carrying modern equipment. They wore helmets with lights, gloves, and carried ropes and scanners. The villagers gathered in large numbers, watching with wide eyes as the experts set up their tools. For many, it was the first time they had seen such things. Children whispered excitedly, pointing at the machines. Women stood in groups, holding their dupatas tightly, whispering prayers. The archaeologists carefully widened the entrance and descended into the chamber with ropes and torches. The crowd above waited anxiously, leaning over the edge. From below, voices echoed as the experts called out to one another. They moved slowly, documenting everything they saw. Hours later, they climbed back up, covered in dust but carrying small objects in their hands. They placed them gently on a cloth, a piece of broken pottery, a coin, and part of a sculpture. The villagers gasped again. The coin gleamed faintly, even after centuries underground. The archaeologists explained that the chamber was part of a much larger underground structure. It seemed to be a forgotten temple or sanctuary that had been buried by time. The carvings on the walls told stories of gods, rituals, and people from a civilization that no one had remembered. "This is not treasure in the ordinary sense," one of the experts said. "This is history. It belongs to everyone." Ramesh stood silently as he listened. He felt proud, but also humbled. He had uncovered something that did not belong only to him but to the world. His wife, Meena, stood by his side, clutching his hand tightly. She whispered, "Do you realize what you have done? You have changed the destiny of our village." His children, their eyes glowing with excitement, asked endless questions about the coins and carvings. They told everyone proudly, "Our father found this." In the days that followed, more teams arrived. They built temporary tents around the site, brought cameras, and even placed ropes to keep the crowd away. The once quiet farmland now looked like a buzzing festival ground. Reporters from newspapers and television channels came with microphones, asking Ramesh to tell his story again and again. At first, he felt shy and nervous, but soon he realized that the world wanted to hear about his journey from a poor farmer searching for water to the man who uncovered a hidden temple. The villagers who had once mocked him now treated him with respect. People who had laughed at his digging now touched his feet and praised his determination. Even the children of the village began to look at him differently, their eyes shining with admiration. Yet Ramesh never let pride overtake him. Whenever someone praised him, he smiled humbly and said, "It was not me. It was the earth. I only kept digging." The archaeologists made more discoveries. Inside the chamber, they found not only coins and pottery but also small sculptures of gods and goddesses, beautifully carved but worn by time. They found painted walls that still carried faint colors, even after hundreds of years. Each day brought a new surprise, and each discovery filled the villagers with wonder. The experts explained that such a sight could bring recognition to the village. Scholars from across the country, even from abroad, might come to study it. This news excited many villagers. Some dreamed of hotels, shops, and tourists filling the village. Others feared the changes it would bring. The headman assured everyone that the government would protect the site and provide money to develop the area. For Ramesh, however, the greatest reward was the knowledge that his simple act of digging had brought honor to his land. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and red, Ramesh sat near the pit, lost in thought. His children played nearby, pretending to dig their own treasures. Meena sat beside him, her eyes soft with pride. "You were searching for water," she said gently. "And instead, you gave the village a river of history." Her words touched his heart deeply. The officials soon arranged for the site to be declared protected. Fences were built, and guards were posted to watch over the chamber. The villagers gathered to witness the ceremony where Ramesh was honored by the district collector. A garland was placed around his neck, and he was given a certificate recognizing his discovery. Cameras flashed as he stood, his simple farmer's clothes contrasting with the importance of the moment. But in his heart, he remained the same humble man. Reporters asked him what he planned to do next. He smiled and replied, "I will still farm my land. I will still wake up before sunrise and plant seeds. This discovery belongs to everyone, not just me. But I will never stop working hard, because hard work is what led me here." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth. As night fell, and the crowd began to thin, Ramesh looked once more at the pit, now carefully guarded and protected. He remembered the day he had picked up his spade, mocked by neighbors and ignored by many. He remembered the blisters, the sweat, the pain. He also remembered the moment when his spade first struck the hollow stone. That sound had changed his life forever. For Ramesh, the journey was more than just finding history. It was proof that persistence, faith, and courage could reveal miracles hidden beneath the hardest soil. He had started with nothing but hope for water. In the end, he had brought not only hope to his family but pride and recognition to his entire village. The news of Ramesh's discovery spread far beyond his village. Newspapers carried headlines about the humble farmer who had uncovered an ancient temple while digging for water. Television channels showed his pictures, standing near the pit with his spade in hand, his face shy but filled with quiet pride. Soon, people from other towns and even distant cities began arriving just to see the place where history had been found under the soil. For the first time, the little village that had once been forgotten was now on the map. Ramesh, however, tried to live as simply as before. Each morning, while people gathered at the site, he still woke up early, tied his old scarf around his head, and went to his field. He planted seeds, watered his plants with what little water they had, and guided his children in their small lessons. But he could not deny that life had changed. Wherever he went, people greeted him with respect. Neighbors who once mocked him now spoke with folded hands, calling him the man who brought honor to the land. The government soon stepped in. The district collector arrived again, this time with a team of senior officials. They spoke to Ramesh, assuring him that his family would be cared for. They announced that the site would be preserved as a protected monument, and visitors from all over would be allowed to come and learn from it. In return, Ramesh's family would receive financial support, enough to ensure they would never struggle for food and basic needs again. Ramesh accepted their offer with humility. He told them, "I do not want wealth. I only want my family and my land to live with dignity." Within weeks, archaeologists uncovered more wonders. The chamber was only the beginning. Deeper tunnels revealed multiple rooms, each filled with carvings, artifacts, and coins that told stories of a forgotten kingdom. Historians claimed it could be thousands of years old, a temple that had been buried by floods or earthquakes long ago. The villagers watched in awe as the experts carefully lifted out ancient sculptures, recording every detail. For them, it was like living inside a storybook. Reporters returned again and again to speak with Ramesh. They asked him what he felt when he first struck the hollow slab. They asked what gave him the strength to keep digging even when others laughed. Ramesh always gave the same simple answer: when you believe in something, you must never stop trying. The earth tests us, but it also rewards patience. His words touched many hearts. Letters of admiration even came from faraway cities, written by people who said they were inspired by his courage. The villagers too began to feel proud. They no longer introduced themselves by the name of their district. Instead, they proudly said, "We are from the village where the hidden temple was found." Some began small businesses, selling food and crafts to the visitors who came daily. Others guided tourists around, telling them the story of Ramesh's digging. The once quiet place was now alive with new opportunities, and it all began with one farmer's determination. At home, life was gentler for Ramesh's family. His wife, Meena, no longer had to worry about whether there would be enough food for the children. She often sat by the window, watching her husband in the field, and thought about how their fortunes had changed. She still cooked on the same clay stove and wore the same simple saris, but her eyes now carried a light of peace. The children, too, were happier. They no longer had to carry heavy pots of water from faraway wells. They went to school with brighter smiles, their classmates treating them with respect because of their father's name. Yet for Ramesh, the greatest joy was not the attention or the rewards. It was the lesson that had unfolded before his eyes that persistence and faith could turn even hardship into blessings. He often told his children, "Remember, life will test you. People may laugh at you. But if your heart tells you to keep going, then never stop. Because beneath the hardest soil, there may be something waiting that can change everything." His children listened with wide eyes, storing his words like treasure in their hearts. Months passed, and the site became famous across the state. Historians declared it one of the most important discoveries of the decade. Pilgrims came to pray, tourists came to marvel, and students came to learn. The government built proper roads leading to the village, electricity lines were strengthened, and clean water was supplied regularly. For the first time, the village tasted development. All of this, the people knew, had begun with the farmer who refused to give up. On the anniversary of the discovery, the government held a ceremony to honor Ramesh. He was invited to the city, dressed in a new kurta, and seated on a stage before a large audience. Scholars and leaders spoke about his courage, calling him an example of ordinary strength creating extraordinary change. When it was his turn to speak, he stood with folded hands and said in his quiet voice, "I did not do this alone. My family gave me hope, and my land gave me its secret. I am only a farmer who kept digging. Anyone can achieve something if they listen to their heart and keep working." The hall erupted in applause. Back in the village that evening, Ramesh sat under the neem tree where his journey had begun. The same place where he once cried over his withered crops now felt different. The land, which once seemed empty and cruel, had shown him a gift hidden beneath. He thought of the first day he struck the earth, mocked by neighbors, with blisters burning on his hands. He smiled quietly at the memory. "The earth gives us what we need," he murmured, "but only when we prove we are willing to work for it." As the stars appeared one by one in the sky, Ramesh's children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. Meena brought out a lantern and placed it beside him. The warm glow lit up his tired but peaceful face. Life had changed, yes, but he remained the same man, a farmer at heart, who believed in the value of honest labor and patience. What began as a desperate search for water had ended as a discovery that changed history. It had shocked the world, lifted his village from obscurity, and given his family a life of dignity. But more than anything, it had taught everyone who heard his story that miracles lie hidden beneath perseverance. The earth may look barren, people may doubt, but hope and effort can uncover wonders no one ever imagined. And so, Ramesh's story became more than just a tale of one farmer. It became a lesson whispered in schools, written in newspapers, and carried in the hearts of many. Never stop digging for your dreams, because sometimes, beneath the dry soil of struggle, lies the treasure of destiny.